Welcome to the Backyard Professor podcast series. I'm coming at you live from my Rocky Mountains here in Idaho. I'm Kerry Schertz, the Backyard Professor. I continue my analysis of the Egyptian figure of the Min Horus character in Facsimile 2 Figure 7. Without further ado, I'll go right into my podcast and I'll see you at the end.
Well, as I continue searching in my sources for ideas to share with you, there is so much. I've tried to organize them a little bit, but I keep finding materials that go back to earlier points I made, and yet which expands into other elements of the Hypocephalus that really do equate well with our Min Horus figure and some of the symbolisms that are associated with him. So it is granted it seems like I'm going back and forth, and yet it is expanding. It is a spiraling upward in understanding the fullest possible view of the meanings of these symbols. And they are not just Egyptian. I'm concentrating on the Egyptian ones, but I find these same symbolisms all over the ancient world. And there are seriously fascinating reasons, most of them having to do with the galactic cosmological house that we live in. Hugh Nibley said the temple is a scale model of the universe. Through his analysis of the typology of temples, John Lundquist has said the same thing. The temples were thought to represent heaven. Margaret Barker goes so far as to say they were considered to be heaven and earth. And so the principles of the stars, the moon, the sun come into play. These are the three heavens in LDS theology, the celestial, terrestrial, and telestial, symbolized by the cosmological elements. Min's pole was considered equivalent or at least parallel, synonymous with the Yggdrasil, the tree in which Odin was crucified on. And I have found some other yet more cosmological interpretations of the tree from all over the ancient world that I want to share and bring about further expansion of understanding these symbols within our own Hypocephalus and how they relate to the ancient patriarchs and prophets' ascensions to heaven. Enoch, Melchizedek, even Adam, Abraham, of course, Elijah, and Christ. These ascents into the sky, into the cosmos, is very shamanistic, as Mircea Eliade has shown. And there are just parallels everywhere, and I want to share a few of these with you. Well, this gets very extensive. In the 1997 text, Temples of Ancient Egypt, edited by Byron E. Schaeffer, Cornell University Press, Schaeffer on page 27 notes of the said festival. This is where the king's divine powers were renewed and regenerated amid an assembly of gods and priests. The central episode of the festival was the ritual death and rebirth of the king. Again, the resurrection, the rejuvenation, the eternal life, conquering your enemies, death being the ultimate enemy. And the death of the king, of course, was symbolically enacted. It was figurative. It was symbolized by his temporary disappearance or by the burial of his caused statue. And when he reappeared, of course, that was simply electrifying to everyone. And he demonstrated that he was reinvigorated and youthful by running 2 or 3 laps around the ceremonial course, interestingly enough. And he was escorted to the double throne, which was set before 2 rows of shrines, one for the gods of Upper Egypt and one for the gods of Lower Egypt. And then he was crowned king of Upper and Lower Egypt. And the courtiers swore allegiance to him, and the gods blessed him. The king gave offerings to the gods. He visited the chapel of Horus and Seth, and received 4 arrows of victory, which were shot in the 4 directions, one in each cardinal point, to ward off enemies. That gives you a brief idea of the said festival, and the whole point is rejuvenation. This is our min figure. I will say that repeatedly as I continue to expand Egyptological information on this angle, because the ithyphallic nature of men, and there are some real shocking surprises in the other symbols associated. For instance, Budge, E.A. Wallace Budge, in his book The Gods of the Egyptians, Volume 1, page 441, under Wetchat. She is a goddess, and she is worshipped as the form of a serpent. The figure that presents the Wetchat eye is a serpent in many of the hypocephali. Now, we're not sure what it is in ours. It looks kind of bird-like. There are other hypocephali that it's not either a bird or a serpent, but it's some kind of a four-legged character. We don't know who that is, but each hypocephalus, of course, was produced by individuals for individuals, so of course we know their variations. There's hundreds of hypocephali being compared these days. Wetchat was identified with Isis. This is so important. I have another source that I'll get to on Isis very soon here. At a very early period, there's abundant proof that Horus, the son of Isis, was worshipped with Isis. And this is on page 442. Occasionally we find her in the form of a large winged serpent with the crown of the north upon her head. Her titles are Wetchat, Lady of Heaven, Wetchat, Lady of Pe, Mistress of Tep, the August One, the Mighty One, Wetchat, Lady of Heaven, Mistress of all the gods. And she is definitely identified with Isis, who is said to have protected her son Horus by shaking her hair out over him. Although Wetchat appears in the form of a serpent twined round the stalk of the papyrus plant and is called the Eye of Re, now the left eye of Re is the moon, the right eye of Re is considered the sun in the mythology. In another version of the chapter of the Book of the Dead, the deceased is called the shoulder of Wetchat. The shoulder of the deceased is called the shoulder of Wetchat. The deceased says, I have knowledge. I was conceived by Sekhmet, and the goddess Neith gave me birth. I am Horus, and I have come forth from the eye of Horus, in other words, Re, which is symbolized by our hypocephalus, these round cushions, these round discs. I am Wetchat who came forth from Horus. I am Horus, and I fly up and perch myself upon the forehead of Re, in the bows of his boat, which is in heaven. And these boats, in our facsimile number 2, they are celestialized, solarized, heavenly boats. And the serpent figure, and the Wetchat eye, and the Horus costume on our figure 7, it all coincides. But this is some more of the extended meaning. Now, remarkably enough, in volume 2 of his book, The Gods of the Egyptians, Bud says the goddess Nekeb-Kau. This is the serpent. She is worshipped in the form of a huge serpent. She was one of the 42 assessors of the Hall of Mati, the negative confession. She has said to have established his head for him, concerning of the dead. Elsewhere she seems to be mentioned as a form of Nut, the heavenly mother, and to be the female counterpart of the serpent god Now. She was a goddess who provided for the dead meat and drink, not the material offerings of this earth, but the divine Chephat food, and this can be compared to the nectar and the ambrosia on which the gods of Olympus lived. See, there's eternal life going on here. You wouldn't know that the Wetchat eye and this serpent bird figure that is presenting the